And the cost of the product is so great, and the value of the product is so high that you can go ahead and ship it around the world in small quantities. And something like Ifshin Violins in Berkeley is known all over the world for the quality of their handcrafted modern violins. A better example, a more industrial example, is Shimano gears. 2/3 of the world's supply of bicycle gears come from Shimano, from a modest-sized factory in Japan. I've got 3 Japanese examples because I happen to be reading an article about Japanese industry when I put these up. Nidec, which makes 75% of all disc drive motors, talk about that's a sub component, or Mabuchi that makes 90% of the drives on your car mirrors for the world. Which you never think of, they're really a component, but is that an industry or not? I mean, it's certainly a factory that produces a specialized product that can be shipped all over the world. Or it can be highly localized, and we have a lot of production that takes the form of the same product or very small differences made on small scale and very locally. And things like restaurants, bakeries, which I have a map of here, haircuts, because they have to do it on you, they can't really ship you around the world. Boutique stores fit this model, we'll see, and so on. So they have small market areas because the customers want ready access, the goods are perishable, or they're working on you directly, personal services, local tastes. People in Berkeley love a certain kind of Frenchified fresh bread, right? And you go to Peoria, the market for that is extremely limited. So if you set up a branch of Acme Bakery in Peoria, you probably wouldn't succeed if you wanted to go to Peoria. Okay, let's talk about places. Okay, now we're talking about dynamic location, about industrial growth, about new industries, about relocation and decline. And I'm going to go through each of those one by one. So while I say it's places, it's also about dynamic. Okay, four points here about making place, new industrial spaces, new spaces, dispersal, and unmaking places. Okay, remember back to the lecture 2 when I talked about how industry has made the modern world. Well, it does it one factory at a time in many cases. That is, rather than the place, as in classical location theory, the landscape already being there, like a checkerboard or chessboard, and you choose where to put your new piece. That'd be more like a go board. It's a new piece you add, right? So that would be the classical model. But in fact, you kind of create the board by the very act of placing your factories. Because factories become the investments, the fixed capital, which also then often go along with infrastructure that's built by other companies, by governments, or by the company itself. They may build a dock or a railway spur or a highway spur to get to their factory, which then attracts suppliers for big factories who build more factories and workshops and so forth. So the playing field, this is an aerial of the GM plant that went into East Oakland in 1917 to make Chevys at a time when East Oakland was nothing but empty fields. Now you may think that East Oakland's always been there. You don't give it a thought, most of you, because you come from the white suburbs. But East Oakland was a major industrial zone, and it had out there where Eastmont Mall is, or was, in 1917, they built a GM factory, and in the middle of nowhere. And it just pulled the city out to it, because people started building houses around it, roads went out there, trolley lines, and so on. And it actually built the city. So unlike rock and roll, industry actually does build cities. The other side of that, of course, and maybe the biggest part of building cities, is that industry attracts labor forces. And labor forces need to be housed, they need to be fed, they want retail stores, and a whole set of secondary things coming into being, and physically into being, that create towns, industrial cities. This is indeed Lowell, Massachusetts, with thousands of workers, all of whom eventually had to be housed, making Lowell not just a place of factories, but a city, an industrial city. This is workers, I think this, where is this? It's got a title, but I can't read it here. I know that's dormitories down in Shenzhen. This may also be. No, I think it's older. It's an older postcard version of an old factory with the workers pouring in somewhere in the U.S. Can't remember where. Okay, what about new spaces? Okay, so indeed, factories make spaces, all right, but they do even more than that. And as industry expands, it tends to build new spaces out on the edges of cities, the edges of regions, edges of countries, even in new countries. Okay, and moving industries constantly are growing into new territory. They need new space, they may be seeking new inputs, they may be seeking new labor forces, they may be seeking new markets. And that kind of expansion is often confused with simply moving to lower costs. Because if you've got a plant, you want to add a new one, your old plant's likely to be in the middle of the city, and your new plant's likely to go on the edge where you can get some space to build a new one, which is likely to be larger than the old one if you're successful. So that GM did not go to the edge of Oakland because it wanted to get away from Oakland. It simply wanted to build where there was some open space. And then Oakland filled in around it. So it didn't run away from the city. It simply built on the edge of the city and expanded the city. So that's often confused. And at the national level, there's this tendency to say, well, all industry in Asia is really American industry or European industry that moved there. But it's not. Most of it is indigenous industry that grew up there. It has nothing to do with factory relocation from the existing industrial center. Some of it does, but a lot of it doesn't. A minority does, a majority doesn't. And that's a very easy confusion, which is often made. Now, new industrial geography to me is a point I want to bring up that as not only new factories come into being, whole new industries come into being, they tend to change radically the industrial geography of the world. They tend to expand it by moving to new places. And this was pointed out a long time ago by Alan Scott and a couple other people. And Silicon Valley is a great example. There are some very good examples just in American history, like when the Silicon Valley replaced the tube industry. Most of the tube and radio and TV industry was in the East Coast, in New York, Philadelphia, making things, RCA, Sylvania, Westinghouse, and so on. But when you went to transistors and solid state, the industry shifted dramatically to the west. Silicon Valley above all, but also Texas, Arizona, Dallas, Austin, Phoenix, and some other places around the west. And that really can't be explained apart from this revolutionary change in what constituted electronics due to a new technology. But you see it in the history of industry with a shift from anthracite coal steel to bituminous coal steel, to new technology, Bessemer furnaces and so on. The industry moved from eastern Pennsylvania to western Pennsylvania. That may not seem like a lot to you, but it was a lot then. Or meatpacking. Where the center of meatpacking in 19th century America was pork packing on the Ohio River in Cincinnati. They're the guys who invented the modern meatpacking plant. It then jumped to Chicago when it became beef packing. Aircraft, double wing, where were the Wright brothers? In Ohio. Curtiss, they were in upstate New York, in Buffalo, I think. There were aircraft factories all over making little biplanes. And, one or two out here in the Bay Area in LA. But when Douglas invented the single wing aircraft, which is still what we use to this day, except for maybe B-1s or something, the aircraft industry shifted decisively to Los Angeles with this big outlier in Seattle. So industrial revolutions in sectors also produce revolutions in geography. It isn't just an aggregate thing we talked about before. It's quite specific. Why would the new industries go to a new place? Well, generally it's not simply because it's cheap. This is a farmhouse in northern San Jose before Silicon Valley swept over it. That's Mission Peak in the background. It's mostly because old places don't suit their needs. In old places, you have old kinds of infrastructure, you have old kinds of worker skills, you have old ideas in business, in finance, and they don't know what to do with you. This is still true if you read Richard Flora and his creative, the creative class, or whatever it's called, Making the Creative Class. And one of his big examples is from his personal experience teaching at Carnegie Mellon, and how you get all these tech whiz bangs going through Carnegie Mellon who would immediately up and move to Silicon Valley because Pittsburgh had no place for them. Pittsburgh was very good at making steel, but never figured out how to make electronics. So a new place is a fresh start in all kinds of ways, new kinds of labor forces and new kinds of business practices. And also they can afford to go to new places often because they're getting those high initial profits from their new products. In Silicon Valley's case, it was profits given to them by defense contracts, World War II and after, which was what Silicon Valley sold most of its products to the military for the first 30, 40 years. Still sells a lot, by the way. Where do you think those guided missiles, those drones, where are the guidance systems made? Right here. Well, you make a lot of money on those kind of hot products and especially defense products, which allows you then to build new factories and infrastructure, new places, attract workers through higher wages, and so on. Okay, dispersal is slightly different, though. Why do factories disperse? Well, there has been a process of deconcentration over time, to some degree. You do see factories farther out than you did in the past. You see them intersecting and selling around the world. With globalization, this is obviously an issue. Why are they able to do that? Because of diminished constraints on location. There are several reasons for this. We tend to have less bulky products and better transport. So you can move things around more easily. Moving around electronic products is a whole different kettle of fish than moving around car parts, let alone steel. Also, there's increasing as capitalism expands, markets expand, as I explained in Lecture 1. You have more available labor in more places, more available things like infrastructure, energy, water, and so on as the world develops. So that allows you to industry can stretch its wings a bit. Also, factories, as they get bigger, often are more self-contained, so that they don't need so much outside inputs, and they can attract their own labor force. And finally, of course, there is the reason, and that's just the general reasons why you can disperse. Why you'd want to disperse is, in some cases, for lower costs, or what are called greenfield locations, where you can get cheaper land and cheaper labor. But it's only one reason for dispersal. It's not the growth reason. It's simply a reason of seeking lower costs, given the possibilities of greater dispersal. And there are many peripheries of dispersal. We notice a lot of car parts went to northern Mexico when the American auto industry got into trouble in the 1980s. So did TVs, by the way, before the Asian producers annihilated the U.S. TV industry. We see before that, the car industry went to the U.S. South to seek cheaper labor in the southern states. Japan had a long history of dispersing factories and contracts out to the countryside, take advantage of cheaper foreign labor. China, I've got a nice map, which I didn't have time to get in here. China's factories are expanding west. Now, part of that is growth. Part of that is getting out of the more expensive east and going west to pick up some of the cheaper farm labor from the west. And some of it is market. So you got three things could be going on in terms of the move west in China. But one of them would be dispersal of this kind. You see a lot of it in Europe. When Eastern Europe joined the EU, lots of factories went into Eastern Europe. Before that, when Spain and Portugal joined the EU, a lot of big factories went down to Spain and Portugal to get cheaper land and labor. But there are real limits to that cheap dispersal for cheap. Most cheap countries, or a lot of cheap places in the world, have very poor infrastructure. They have poor quality labor, that is lower productivity, and they have transport and supply problems. And this you see even on a world scale today, where factories that went to Asia for cheaper labor, or went to Mexico or Guatemala for cheaper labor, are pulling back somewhat because of more expensive oil prices and transport, more insecurity of long-distance transported products. When Japan had the meltdown in Fukushima, it disrupted a whole bunch of supply plants, which disrupted production all over the world. Because you had a few of those companies that provided parts to key parts that you couldn't get anywhere else, and suddenly transport, everything was disrupted by the combination of the tsunami and the nuclear meltdown. Of course, another reason why there's limits for dispersal is clustering effects, and that's what I'm coming to now. Just a last note, unmaking places. Places come apart. That's an old factory. Used to be a meatpacking factory in San Francisco, not obviously doing so well. Why? Because San Francisco doesn't do meatpacking anymore. It's gone somewhere else. So, while industry makes new places and rolls out the carpet, technical change and growth, in many places it rolls up the carpet. And I mentioned this before, I'll mention it again. That's the famous Iron Bridge over, which river? I want to say this Upper Severn, but I don't think that's right. In western, kind of on the border of Wales and England. And that was a very famous early bridge made entirely of iron for the first time. First one ever in the 1830s, I think. And this river valley was full of mills, which inspired this painting of iron foundries, this painting of the Satanic Mills. And now it's this really idyllic rural area. And the only thing left are a few brick kilns, dead brick kilns, and this bridge. Or San Francisco used to produce a lot of big brand beer, and those are empty beer factories in Mission District. So a lot of the decline of industry does bring about the decline of cities and towns. Look at the car industry in Detroit or Toledo or Flint, Michigan. They've been brought down, as Michael Moore points out in Roger and Me, quite effectively, by the decline of the American auto industry. So, which has nothing to do with cost. It just has to do with the American auto. Well, it may have something to do with cost, but American automobile industry also just got outcompeted. Its firms got sluggish. It didn't keep up with the technology and the style and the new ways of doing things for a long time. And especially in the 80s, when it went down the first time, that was the case. So industry can build places, it can bring them down, and every time it brings them down, you immediately get the bogeyman of high costs. Oh yeah, the reason that Lockheed moved out of Los Angeles and went to Alabama is simply because of costs. Well, that's only vaguely partly true. Because the aircraft industry, especially commercial aircraft and certain kinds of military aircraft that Lockheed did, were shrinking. And it wasn't getting the contracts, so it had to reduce its footprint, and it had to find lower costs because it wasn't doing so well. McDonnell Douglas, which was combined between St. Louis and LA, is no longer in LA because they don't produce commercial aircraft anymore. The old Douglas DC-7s, DC-9s, they're gone. They're history. And you either buy a Boeing or you buy an Airbus or one of these smaller, talk about dynamism, you get new producers in new places, like Embraer in Brazil, producing these smaller-sized planes. Another Air Canada, or whatever it's called, Canada Air, came in with a niche product. They've built up in new places while McDonnell Douglas closed down. Okay, now let's get to clusters and districts in our remaining time. Industrial clusters, very important part of the industrial landscape. Absolutely critical part. In fact, in recent years, last 20 years, it's become clear that more and more that the key geography of industry is around clusters more than isolated factories. Now, there are various kinds of clusters in different products. There are big factory clusters like Pittsburgh or Detroit, Louisiana, southern Louisiana, and so on. And then there's a lot of clusters of smaller firms. And smaller firms are what we immediately think of in terms of clustering. As you'll see, the logic of spatial concentration benefits smaller firms more than large firms. But it turns out it can benefit both. So just an example, China, with the industrialization of China, you get this amazing landscape popping up of literally hundreds of specialized towns that are producing one product with hundreds or even thousands of firms. The button town of Kuitu in Zhejiang, I don't know if I'm supposed to pronounce that right, Zhejiang province, 700 factories, 15 billion buttons a year. Nobody else in the world produces buttons. All buttons in the world now virtually come from this one spot. Or Yiwu that produces socks. Or Hanji produces toothbrushes. So I love these examples. Or ties. I mean, good Lord. Who knew? But a lot of workshops concentrated together seem to have a collective power to dominate a continental or world or national market. Italy has been famous for these kind of small firm clusters for years. Though they're now competing with a lot of Chinese clusters and having more trouble than they did in the past. But this was a huge discovery that all modern industry wasn't Ford's River Rouge plan. That a lot of modern industry, extremely competitive industry, could be done in small firms, small workshops in these clusters. There are even single firm clusters. BASF down in, it's just south of Frankfurt in Mannheim, I think it is, on the Rhine. It's a chemical company, 36,000 workers and 250 factories with 8,000 products all in one complex. Why? Because they share a lot of feedstocks, they share a lot of other transport infrastructure, they have a big pile of land, which is theirs to play with, and they are surrounded by a very good workforce that they use in all these different products. So why do you cluster? Well, the key term here, first key term you want to learn, is agglomeration, economies of agglomeration. It's an old idea. It's actually in Alfred Weber, but it was kind of his last chapter, and everybody ignored it for a long time. But it turns out to actually be the most important thing. And what it represents is the collective calculus of many firms making decisions simultaneously, rather than one firm deciding where to put its little chess piece. It's about making collective decisions. That is more like the game of Go, I might add. And there are a number of reasons, which I'm going to go through in just a sec. Transport, infrastructure, markets, labor, la-di-da-di-da. Now, clustering produces high costs. If you concentrate together, you tend to drive up the cost of land, the cost of labor, and some other costs, accessory costs. So big industrial centers, big urban centers tend to be the most expensive places. But the only way to explain why anybody would locate in these places is that they get a benefit from it. And the benefit is sufficient to allow them to pay high costs, high labor costs, high land costs, high taxes, whatever it is. And again, this runs up against the idea that greenfield sites are always cheaper, but they're not, because they don't have the benefits of clustering. And if you can't find the input you need, the energy you need, the water you need, the skilled labor you need, the other factories and other firms you want to interact with on a daily basis, then you're screwed if you go to a greenfield site. So only very big, self-contained factories tend to go to greenfield sites. And almost everything else goes in or around a major cluster or major city or major metropolitan region. So this goes against, again, the mythology of cheapness, that industrial location is chiefly driven by cheapness. No, it's chiefly driven by productivity and returns. Coming back to what I said about the dynamism of capitalism, the dynamism of industrialization. Okay, so let's go through these logics. They're pretty straightforward, and I think don't need a lot of explanation, but stick up your hand if it isn't clear. One of the things you get in a center, you've always gotten in cities, but you can get in a big industrial center, is transportation hubs. Today, of course, airports are the most important thing. River ports, so, and seaports, extremely important. If you're in London, if you're in the Bay Area, if you're in LA, if you're in Shanghai, you have a huge port, a huge airport or more. You can get around easily, and you can get your products around. And usually these are all served by railroads and highways as well. Secondly, and very important, shared infrastructure. Infrastructure is expensive. Water supplies are very expensive if you do it yourself, and very cheap if you do it collectively. Which is why we have these big systems like East Bay Mud or Hetch Hetchy that supply millions of people, thousands of factories and offices, because that's a really cheap way to do it. Contrary, of course, to the theory of neoliberalism that says everything should be commodified and parceled up and done by private industry. So we do all that, a lot of it we do publicly, because that's the best way to take advantage of these kinds of so-called public goods with a shared overhead. But even building reuse, factory buildings come and go. Companies go out of business in Silicon Valley. When you get your startup, you have immediate space around that you can find in the middle. You don't have to build anything. It's there. It's supplied. You have everything you need. Could you two stop talking, please? Thanks. Those are really useful. Okay, access to markets.